So I just saw No Time to Die. Um, leading up to it, I did a rewatch of a bunch of Bond movies, starting with The Living Daylights, the Timothy Dalton era, because that's kind of when things turn a little bit more modern, I think. I went through those movies, the first two Dalton movies. I went through Pierce Brosnan's Goldeneye and Tomorrow Never Dies and The World Is Not Enough. Skip Die Another Day because I don't need to say anything. And the Daniel Craig era, I watched those. And I watched Skyfall, and I skipped straight to Die Another Day because I kind of remembered Spectre. I didn't really need to watch Spectre. I wasn't really the biggest fan of Spectre. I have different thoughts on Spectre now with the context of No Time to Die. But I wanted to talk about the whole franchise because I just started thinking about the franchise, and I think, I don't know, I've wanted to do a video like this for a while. I'm really into the spy genre. I really like spy thrillers. I like Jason Bourne. I just did a rewatch of Jason Bourne as well, kind of thinking about all this stuff. I played through the Splinter Cell games for the first time recently. I never played Splinter Cell before. I've always been a Metal Gear Solid fan, though Metal Gear is very different because it's very dystopian science fiction future with modern warfare elements and, war economy, military industrial complex stuff, and Cold War stuff as well. But it has mechs and it's alternate future, all kinds of crazy conspiracies and stuff. And I've always been a big fan of Hitman, so I kind of wanted to talk about all these things a little bit. I wanted to talk about Bond, but I also wanted to talk about the spy genre. I don't know too much about the Jack Ryan stuff, but I watched some of the Jack Ryan movies, so I kind of wanted to talk about that a little bit too. I wanted to talk about Hunt for Red October a little. Uh, and I just kind of wanted to cover this whole Bond series and my thoughts on the genre and on the various Bonds and I guess sort of ranking them in a way. I don't know if I have like a direct ranking that I would do, but I do have certain favorites that I'll talk about. And I want to talk about the Daniel Craig era especially because the Daniel Craig era is one that I liked and then didn't like and then liked again. More or less. I mean, it might have been even more up and down than that. It might have been like I liked it again, disliked it again, liked it again, disliked it. Like it was pretty back and forth. But as of right now, with the context of No Time to Die, I feel like the Daniel Craig era is something that I respect a lot more now than I did before. And I can't talk about that without talking about spoilers. So you guys, just warning you all that I am going to talk about No Time to Die spoilers. I will mark it at a certain point in the video when I start talking about it, just in case, because, I know that not everyone's seen it. Though that is a movie that I could see being spoiled pretty widely. I weirdly enough don't see spoilers that much online for it, but that is one that feels spoilable. I don't know. Yeah, so with that, I guess I'll just talk about the first era of Bond, Connery, and my thoughts on Sean and his Bond, rest in peace, to him, and Roger Moore as well. Uh, I feel like Connery's Bond, I mean, I feel like the first two Bonds I'm going to be a little bit restrictive in what I say, because I feel like they've been talked about to death. They've been talked about a lot, and we all kind of know the differences between the Bonds. We all know Connery is a lot more physical. We all know he was a lot more true to Fleming in the way that the books were very directly, like the plots from the books were very directly lifted for those films with Dr. No and Goldfinger and stuff like that. Later on, they started making things up as they went because of, I think, issues with the Fleming estate and with issues with the stories. And at a certain point, they just ran out of stories to tell that were based on the books, and they just had to kind of go off of short stories. Like For Your Eyes Only and Spy Who Loved Me. Those are great movies, but they're mostly made up. They're based off of a short story that Fleming wrote, more or less, but they're not really... They just kind of use the name. Like, they're more original stories. Yeah, so every Bond era is a little bit different, And I feel like the character grows a lot, and it's something that I appreciate about Bond. You know, when I think about why I like James Bond, like, what is it about the character that I enjoy and the films that I enjoy? Because some people feel put off by it because it's all very superficial. It's all very like, oh, another Bond movie's coming out. Sure, I'll watch it. What the hell? It's almost like a cultural thing, and it's something that a lot of older people recognize and younger people maybe don't as much. And, you know, I have thought about that. Like, why do I like the character so much? Because I didn't really grow up watching Bond. It's not something that I was raised on. It was something that I found later. Because the thought, like the concept of like a sneaking character, a spy, a stealth character, that's always been an appeal to me. Like even when I play role-playing games, I always like to play stealth characters. That's always been my go-to thing. And I've always liked stealth video games. So the concept of a spy has always appealed to me. And I came to the series later. So the first Bond movie I watched was GoldenEye. I saw parts of it when I was younger, but I didn't really watch it until I was a teenager. And then I think after that, I'd seen parts of Live and Let Die on television because, you know, they would, you know, on TNT or whatever, they would run random James Bond movies, or on TBS probably. And I saw part of Live and Let Die, and it was kind of strange. That was the first one that introduced me to the concept of another person playing Bond. I didn't even know Roger Moore played Bond. I didn't know any of that. I just thought of Pierce Brosnan, and I thought of when I think of James Bond, I always thought of Pierce Brosnan on the GoldenEye N64 cartridge. Just his face on that, because that was actually my first experience with Bond, more or less, was actually the N64 game, more than the GoldenEye movie. However, when I saw the movie, I loved the movie, and GoldenEye is actually my favorite James Bond movie. And then I saw The Living Daylights, because I wanted to get into Bond, and I looked around at the different Bond actors. I looked at the list, and I was like, I don't know, there was something about Timothy Dalton where he was a standout. Like him and George Lazenby, they were different, right? Like they weren't the Bonds that people really talked about or thought of. And the concept of watching a Bond movie that predates GoldenEye, because GoldenEye always talks about, or in GoldenEye, it's always talked about that, you know, you're a relic of the Cold War. There's always these references to the Cold War. And so I thought that watching the Bond movies that were previous to GoldenEye was a great place to start, because that's like, you know, right before that, you know, right at the tail end of the Cold War. And I was right, because it was a perfect place to start. The way Living Daylights deals with the stuff in Afghanistan and all that, with the Soviets, all that was very relevant, and I really appreciated the historical nature of that. And that's one thing that I love about Bond. Every era has a certain historical reference to it, and it's all grounded within the time that it was set. And it feels like it's this character, this tapestry, right? This life story of this character that's always changing. I think of comic books a lot, and I'm going to be talking about comic books a lot when I talk about Bond, because to me, James Bond is a comic book character. He is, like, the way that the James Bond continuity and timeline existed pre-Daniel Craig was very comic book, because it was a sliding timeline. Think of Spider-Man, right? Like Spider-Man in the 1960s, when it was Stan Lee and Steve Ditko and yada, yada, yada. They wrote Spider-Man, and those stories remained canon to this day. So, now, to be fair, I don't really know Marvel continuity. I'm more of a DC guy, so I don't know to what extent they've retconned things. I remember they had a big retcon with Mary Jane and Peter Parker's marriage in the mid-2000s, so I know that they did that. But overall, it was the same character, and they kept it going. You know, like, the story of Spider-Man from 1960 remained canon with the story of Spider-Man right now dealing with normal, you know, modern stuff. And the way that they dealt with that was it was a sliding timeline. So you just kind of assumed that Spider-Man's age remained, even and that he didn't get older. And that's just kind of how it works. And that's kind of how it worked for Bond up until Daniel Craig, because then with Daniel Craig, they did a proper reboot, and they gave Bond a new origin story. We'll talk about that when we get there. Huge tangent, but I wanted to talk about this in relation to Sean Connery, because Sean Connery, to me, is the youngest Bond, the earliest Bond, the most aggressive, physical Bond, ignoring Daniel Craig here. He's the earliest Bond, and, you know, not only is he the first one and the earliest in that sense, but he is the youngest, I think, in the story and literally, because he was 30 years old. They sort of played him up like he was maybe a little bit older, I think, but it was never really outright stated. But Connery is 30 years old when he gets the role for Dr. No. And that's always been interesting to me, because Sean, that's what he brings to the role. And, you know, people talk about how sexist he was, how he's slapping women on the ass, and he was, you know, even a little bit forceful. Like, there's a scene in Goldfinger where he's a little bit too forceful, and a little bit weird. The scene where he goes into the shower, or into the spa. I was about to say shower. That's in Skyfall. But when he goes into the spa with the girl in Thunderball, he's just very, very forceful. Even with the girl in From Russia with Love, he kind of smacks her a little bit. It's very true to Ian Fleming. Ian Fleming, the way he writes. He wrote Bond as a very aggressive, like very sexually aggressive, very dominating type guy, and not submissive. And that was pretty much how he was written. And in that way, Connery is the most true to Bond, true to Fleming in that respect. He's the most sexist. He's the most whatever. And I'm not trying to virtue signal, by the way. I'm not trying to, say Bond is a bad guy. I'm using sexist for, I don't know, lack of a better way to put it. That's the only way to put it. Like, that's just how he was. And that's to some extent how he still is. That's just kind of part of the character. And you see that the most in Sean Connery, because that's just what he was. And he felt like a younger, more immature Bond, I guess. And that's where we get to Roger Moore. Now, we are kind of skipping the George Lazenby thing. George Lazenby, I don't have too much to say about it. I'm not the biggest fan of that movie. And I know that's a heresy to some Bond fans, because some Bond fans really love On Her Majesty's Secret Service. One Bond fan that really loves that movie is actually Christopher Nolan. So there are respected filmmakers and film buffs that really love that movie, and I understand the appreciation for it. It was ahead of its time. Like, the way the action scenes are filmed, the way it cuts, it's almost like it was trying to be Jason Bourne in 1969 when it was made. It was very quick in how it was cut. And I really appreciate the movie for that. I think where I have an issue with On Her Majesty's Secret Service is where I enter as a Bond fan. I could see at the time it being kind of crazy, and being an Ian Fleming fan, if you read the books and then watched that movie, that it felt... I've heard that book, or that movie, is true to that book. I don't know if that's true, but I've just heard that. And if that's the case, it's definitely a big deal for you to be a fan of Ian Fleming and then watch that movie. It must have been a really big deal. But for me, when I think of James Bond's wife, I always think of her in retrospect. I think of the way she's referenced in the Roger Moore era, in the Pierce Brosnan era a little bit, and definitely in the Timothy Dalton era in License to Kill, when he references his wife, when Felix references that he was married once, and that still hurts him. So I always think of Bond's wife in retrospect, that Bond always had this sort of mysterious figure that she died and it broke his heart. And I always liked leaving that up to the imagination. I like leaving the character a little bit mysterious, I guess. And even with his backstory and his childhood in Skyfall and stuff like that, like, they leave it a little bit open. And within the film universe, I appreciate that a lot. Because I like using my imagination. I like kind of thinking, this is totally a headcanon thing, but like, what if it was one of the girls? What if one of the Bond girls ended up being his wife, and then she died? You know, like, which girl would it be? And to me, I always felt that Tatiana from Russia with Love was always the perfect person for Bond. I always felt like she's my favorite Bond girl. So I always felt like she and Connery had this great chemistry. And when they reference or when they refer to each other as Mr. and Mrs. Summers in From Russia with Love, I always appreciated how just like they fit in perfectly as a married couple anyways. So it's kind of a headcanon thing. It's whatever. I mean, it's whatever. But my point is with that is that it set up an expectation of what Bond's wife is meant to be, and it did not live up to that expectation when I watched the movie, when I watched On Her Majesty's Secret Service, because I didn't really like Tracy that much. She was not a bad Bond girl, but I don't think she was a very good one either. I thought she was kind of in the middle. She was kind of a middle ground Bond girl. She was strong, but she wasn't, and she had an interesting lineage with the stuff with her father. But I found her to be just kind of neutral. She didn't really stand out to me. And of course, that's all subjective. For some people, she's their favorite Bond girl, and for that person, then they can totally buy into the marriage thing, and it works out great. And that's great. For me, I had issues with that. I had issues with Bond's wife and my expectations for who Bond's wife is meant to be and how much that story is meant to impact him and how much it matters. To be honest with you, I feel like Vesper mattered more to Bond than Tracy. Or it felt like she did in Casino Royale. I bought that a lot more than I bought the Tracy thing. Also, George Lazenby, I'm not the biggest fan of how he portrayed the character. I felt like there's one part where he's actually dubbed, where he's doing a fake voice and he couldn't do the accent, so they had someone else dub his voice. And it's something that I noticed when I first watched it, actually, because I was like, is he doing that voice? Like, what is that voice? That doesn't sound like him. I was very confused. And I was just put off by it. Now, some people didn't even notice, but it was something that I noticed, and I didn't know it was a dub, but I just thought he was doing a different voice. It just was very off-putting to me. So Lazenby, I'm not the biggest fan of, and the plot of the movie is I can't even recall it. Wasn't it about like mind control or something? I don't know. And the way Blofeld kills Tracy is so lame to me. I wish he just sent someone to kill Tracy. People that have watched my channel, you know, you've probably watched my GTA 4 video, I would assume. I think that the way either Roman or Kate dies, or not Kate, sorry, the way Roman dies, specifically, is the way that should be done, where it wasn't Dmitri himself that came and killed Roman, like it was with Kate, where it was the mafia guy, Jimmy Petrovic, or Jimmy, not Petrovic, sorry, Jimmy, whatever his name was. He comes and shoots he does a drive-by on the wedding, and then it hits Kate. I felt like that was always a little bit cartoony, because it's like, it's not like Don Corleone is going to come out and like shoot himself, you know, or not shoot him, you know, come out and do the drive by himself. He would send someone. And I always felt like in On Her Majesty's Secret Service, it was a little bit cheesy that Blofeld himself is the one that shoots Tracy. I feel like it should have been a hitman that did it. And I can just think of better ways for that to be done. The marriage and the wedding and the death. I thought of one scenario that I think would be great, and it's that, like, Bond, and this is too R-rated, this is too extreme for Bond, especially in the 60s, but I always thought the scenario of, like, Bond is about to kiss her, like, you know, they're married, and you may kiss your bride, he's about to kiss her, and then he hears the shot, and he opens his eyes, and her eyes roll back, and then he's holding her, and she's dead. And Bond, I just imagine Timothy Dalton, for some reason, with his angry portrayal of Bond, like, I imagine him just looking, like, fiercely, like, who did this? And then there's another shot, and it misses Bond. and then he knows, and then it goes into Daniel Craig, Jason Bourne, fucking run sprint mode, and he just runs after him, and it becomes a chase, and it's just this chase to like kill this guy, and then after he kills him, Bond just is wrecked, and then he just sits there and cries. That would be Alone. That would be perfect, I think. That's how I would do it, I guess. That's just a thought that I had. I was thinking about that earlier the other day. And the way it happens, it feels limited. I don't know. It just feels... Yeah. So that's my thoughts on Her Majesty's Secret Service. Cool for people that like it. That's cool. You know, a lot of people that are hardcore, diehard Bond fans, they really rank it up there, like, you know, top 5, top 10. But for me, it's just not my cup of tea. It's more of a personal thing. If I had to rate the movie, I would probably give it like a 6 or a 7 out of 10. Like, I think it's a good movie. But if I had to rank it as a Bond film among the 25 Bond films, it would be towards the bottom for me. Because it's kind of like I'd rather just pretend it's not canon for me. Or canon, loosely canon, I guess. And I just kind of ignore it. So with that, we move to Roger Moore. And I think where Roger Moore comes in is a sort of maturity of the character. Ironically, the films got more immature. They got more campy. They got more silly. Diamonds Are Forever also was moving in that direction. I think Diamonds Are Forever is a terrible movie. I think it's probably the worst Bond movie for me. It's got some things that are cool about it because it's set in Vegas, but I don't really like that movie. The Live and Let Die, weirdly enough, if you compare Diamonds Are Forever to Live and Let Die, the Roger Moore era actually grounded it more coming out of Connery, which is very interesting to me, considering where Roger Moore would go. But going into Live and Let Die, it was actually more grounded and more serious than Diamonds Are Forever, because Diamonds Are Forever was so over the top. It was about using diamonds for like a super weapon or something, and there were Blofeld clones, and it was like doppelgangers. It was like Metal Gear Solid or something. It was nuts. And then you get to Live and Let Die, and it's still cheesy and weird, and it's sort of blaxploitation movie with, you know, 70s stereotypes of, like, you know, the black cop chick with the afro, like that kind of thing. Like Goldmember, Austin Powers, think of that. And I have a guilty pleasure appreciation for Live and Let Die. I really like Live and Let Die. Again, like I said, it was the first Roger Moore Bond movie that I saw, and it was the first Bond movie that introduced me to the concept of other people playing Bond. So I have a little bit of a soft spot for it, and it's one of my favorite Roger Moore movies. But I like that it's very weird. Like, it's definitely like the weirdest Bond movie that exists. It's got voodoo and magic. It's got tarot cards. Solitaire is a very interesting character because she's kind of like a young character that is sort of playing Bond, and there's this sort of push and pull that's going because Bond is like the elder, and they're fucking, like they're having sex, but it almost feels like a weird master apprentice thing that's going on there, where there's this sort of, she's learning from him, and she sort of plays him, and then he plays her back. And there's this sort of interplay that goes on, and I really like that about it. And I like that they play cards at the end of the film. The inflation death of the villain is very, very weird, and very over the top, where he sticks the thing in his mouth while he's underwater, and then he explodes like a balloon. Very, very cartoony. Like, way more cartoony than anything in Connery. Which is ironic because the rest of the movie is more grounded in a way because it's about, like, cocaine and heroin and stuff like that. It's about, like, a drug trade. It's very interesting. So, yeah, I don't know. I've always kind of liked that movie. But I understand why some people don't like it. It definitely doesn't age well by modern political sensibilities, I guess. But I don't personally really care about that much, so or it doesn't really. I can kind of look at it again. Think of it like this character's tapestry. It's his history, and like I compare it to comic books. I'm gonna link a video in the description actually to this. There's a great description, to go on a little bit of a tangent here, which is to be expected if you're watching my channel, because this is what I do. But there's a great description that Grant Morrison gives about Batman's life and Batman continuity, and how he starts and how he goes into Adam West territory, and then he goes out of it, and he's a changed man, and he gets serious, and then he's faced with tragedy, and his back gets broken, and all this stuff. Like, it's this long history, and how each era sort of reflects a time with this character's life. And, you know, when you think of your life, right, like, I hear older people talk about this all the time. Like, when you're in your 50s and you look back on your 40s, you feel like you're a different person. You look back on your 30s, you feel like you're a different person. You look back on your 20s, you feel like you're even more different. And then you look at your teenage years and it's like, my God, who was I? You know? That's Bond. That's Batman. When you look at the eras, well, I was going to say Superman, but Superman's actually pretty consistent overall. Like, Superman's always kind of been the same. But there are certain characters that always change through the years. And Bond is one of those characters. He's just always changing. And that's what makes his continuity so fun and so interesting, because you're really seeing the life of this character in this deep lore that just goes on, and like, every adventure is a standalone. And it's all this, like, rich history of, like, you know, he's this badass, this ever-living badass that, like, you know, it's part of Bond as a character. He can't die, you know? And it's true in real life. You know, you can't get rid of Bond. You know, no matter what, you can't escape this franchise. There's 25 of these movies. Think of, like, Star Wars, right? Like, there's 6 Star Wars movies, and then there's the Disney movies, and then there's, like, you know, it kept going now, but, like, back then, it was a 6-movie thing. Like, think of Bond, like, there's 25 movies. Bond isn't even a movie franchise. It feels like a TV show that just keeps going or something. It's, like, eternal. It's immortalized. And what's also cool about that is what it means to British people. Because British people definitely like, they look at Bond, and it's like a national thing for them, you know? Think about what the Queen and Daniel Craig did at the Olympics in 2012, which was crazy, because it was like peak Bond hype time because Skyfall had came out, and the Olympics was going on in London, of all places, and you have Daniel Craig jumping out of a plane and greeting the Queen and stuff. Like, it's awesome. It's awesome. So yeah, like, Bond is such an important part of, like, Britishness, you know, like, and that's why it makes No Time to Die a little bit interesting and a little bit hard to talk about when we get there. Again, we're building up to that. So back to Roger Moore, and back to Bond as a thing, you know, like, you think of Bond in every era. You think of Bond historically, and you always think about certain moments, you know, like, remember them, and, like, how much of a badass he is. Like, remember the moment when he fought Christopher Lee, the Man with the Golden Gun? I don't like that movie. I don't like Man with the Golden Gun, but I love the ending, and I like watching the ending just on its own as, like, a Bond short story, because it's so cool to see Bond fight this legendary assassin type character, and going through on his personal island of death with his little minion that's like a you know, mini-me from Austin Powers, Knick-Knack, and, you know, he's, like, setting traps and playing pranks, basically, and Bond has to snipe this guy with his pistol. And, you know, it's this guy that's like this, he's the best shot, he's the perfect shot, with the Man with the Golden Gun, Scaramanga. Like, he's the perfect shot, and Bond has to face this guy who's, like, his equal, and they feel like they're equals in a way, like, when they both stand next to each other, because Christopher Lee is, like, a giant. He's huge. And, you know, he'd played Dracula not that long before this. And, like, it's a great moment, and it's a great part of Bond history. And thinking about that now, thinking about each one of these movies, going back now, I think about the Connery era a little bit again. One thing I forgot to talk about was Thunderball. Um, because I really like Thunderball. Thunderball is one of my favorites, and some people don't like that one. But one of the things that I really like about that movie is the girl in it. Because I was talking about Solitaire. When I was talking about Solitaire, it kind of reminded me in my head, like, oh, I forgot to talk about Domino. Because Domino is my other favorite Bond girl from this, like, older era. Domino has this personal stake in that the villain fucked her over and killed her husband and replaced him, like had someone use his face and replace him. Thunderball feels like such a spy thriller, like it's awesome. That's what I love about it. It feels like a return to form, because From Russia with Love was very much a spy thriller, and then Goldfinger was good, and it was very iconic, but it felt like the spy stuff was a little bit put on hold on it, and I felt in the plot was a little bit too simple, I guess. When you get to Thunderball, it goes back to that plot. And one thing that I love about Thunderball is the scene when all the 00 agents get their report, or get their dossier, their objective, and they open up their thing, they're all reading it right there in front of each other at this table. I've always loved that, because you see the other 00 agents, unnamed. And I love that. I love that about Ian Fleming's writing. I love that he just gives you the dossier and you just read it. It's sort of like a found footage thing. Like, think of like if you're playing BioShock and you get like the audio tape and you're listening to it. Another book that does this is actually Bram Stoker's Dracula. It's like found footage. Like you're getting the different reports that are written on a typewriter from the characters, and you're essentially reading notes. It's like found footage story, or another thing. I never played this game, but a game like Gone Home, where you're just kind of reading notes, you know. And one game that does that specifically within the Bond vein is Hitman, when you get your dossier. That's something that I always liked about Hitman, and it's one of the things that differentiates it from Metal Gear Solid, is that Metal Gear Solid just beats you over the head with the story. And I love Metal Gear's story, but Kojima's not subtle in what he does. And I love Hideo Kojima, but it's not subtle. Hitman was always like, it takes its time, it tells you the story of these characters, and you read the backstory, and you don't have to read it, but they give you a full dossier on everything that's going on. And I always love that. I always love the background information. I love being immersed in the spy thing, where you feel like you're a spy watching it. You feel like you're a spy by participating in this art. The film, the game, the book, whatever. You feel like you're immersed in this spy work. And I'm sure Tom Clancy does that as well. Though I've never read a Tom Clancy book, but I do love Hunt for Red October. Oh my gosh. I think I'm going to talk about that when we get to Casino Royale, because I kind of want to compare Casino Royale to Hunt for Red October, because they both do the origin story for the spy, and show the story of like how someone goes from one place to the other, or how they go from being a rookie to being a badass, essentially. So I want to talk about that when I get there. But yeah, I mean, that's always been important to me. But Goldfinger is so iconic as well. And there's something to be said for that. Spy Who Loved Me, lead right into that from Man with the Golden Gun. Spy Who Loved Me is so iconic. Everything with Jaws and all that. I don't even need to say anything about Spy Who Loved Me. I guess one of the things that I think of is the moment with the key, where the girl is trying to activate the car, and Roger Moore is being very dry and says, no, it's the big one. I really like that. I really like that this Bond is more of an old man, where he feels, this is your dad's Bond. Roger Moore is your dad's Bond. I've heard people say it like that before. Or your grandfather's Bond. And that's always been a good way to describe him. Because he does feel like he's Bond. He feels like he's James Bond in his prime. I feel like that's Roger Moore. Like, it's James Bond in his prime. In the way that, in the Grant Morrison video that I'll link, he describes the Adam West era of Batman as being Batman in the prime of his life. Batman and Robin kicking ass, having fun, and that was like Batman in his prime. Now, funny enough, nowadays we look at it as, well, that's just campy and cheesy, and that's like the worst era for Batman. And people view it the same way with Bond. Like Adam West, worst era for Batman. Roger Moore, worst era for Bond. But for the character himself, it's probably his peak in the way that that's probably when he's most like like the iconic, the legendary missions, the legends, you know? Like fighting Jaws, like those were, it was peak in a way. It's like it's the iconic stuff that you think of. What you think of when you think of Bond. And that's what I love about Roger Moore. And I think that's most of what I have to say about Roger Moore. Funny enough. I like Octopussy. I think Octopussy's kind of underrated. The name of it is absolutely silly. And you'd think that you're in for just a total joke meme fest. But Octopussy has some cool things about it. I think my favorite thing about it is actually that Bond uses a lot of disguises in the film. And this probably doesn't make the movie sound any more serious, and it probably makes it sound more cheesy, but there's a part where Bond uses like a mustache, like a fake mustache disguise, and he's dressed as a Cuban guy in the pre-title sequence where he's like going undercover in Cuba. Very Hitman. Very Hitman. And I like that stuff. I like when Bond uses disguises. And, you know, it's something to keep track of. It's something, a little mind game I like to play where when I watch the movies, I keep track of how many times Bond uses a disguise or uses an alias. Like, you know, how many times did he do this in this film? Like, I like those little statistics or those little stats to just kind of keep track of in your head. Yeah, A View to a Kill is just, I don't have much to say about it. I saw it once. It's kind of sad. I feel like Octopussy was a great send-off for Roger Moore. It echoed Goldfinger a lot in a lot of ways, like the scuba diving and with the crocodile on his head. It's very like the duck in Goldfinger in the pre-title sequence where he's scuba diving and there's a little duck sticking out of his head. Things like that. I really appreciate that about Octopussy, and I feel like Octopussy was like an homage to the series and sort of an ending to that canon of Bond, because Roger was he was older. Weird to think about, but he was older than Connery. So when Roger Moore got the job to play Bond, he was already older than Sean Connery. Roger Moore passed away first, before Sean Connery as well, in real life. But Roger was always older. And so, continuity-wise, certainly Sean and Roger are the same Bond. Like, there's no doubt about that. One little thing as well that I wanted to mention relating to continuity is there would have been more and better continuity between the Connery era and Roger and his era if there weren't so many rights problems. There were all these like legal problems that they had to deal with over Blofeld and the different companies. I don't think it's the Fleming estate, but it might. I'm sure it's hooked up in all this. There were all these rights problems over it, and that's why Never Say Never Again was made with a remake of Thunderball, which I have not seen, surprisingly. The only Bond movie I haven't seen. And for Spy Who Loved Me, they originally wanted the villain of Spy Who Loved Me to be Blofeld, I believe. Which would have been awesome, because that would have been a perfect send-off to the whole Spectre storyline that was set up in the Connery era. Because that storyline was left hanging, and we didn't really get a conclusion to it. Because of the way You Only Live Twice ended. Now, in the books, You Only Live Twice ended that plotline. But for the movies, it kept it open. So, and then Tracy dies, and it's like, shit, well, what's left? So, unfortunately, they didn't really have anything to do for Spy Who Loved Me. So they had to get a new villain. They had to make up a new villain. So they made a new villain. And the villain of Spy Who Loved Me is a little bit forgettable, to be honest with you. You know, who you think of when you think of Spy Who Loved Me, you think of Jaws. You don't really think of the mastermind behind it. But man, I wish it was Blofeld. But that's when we get to For Your Eyes Only, when Blofeld is basically a throwaway villain in the pre-title sequence, so they can just, end that plot line and just get rid of him. And that's a really disappointing death for Blofeld, for him to go out like that. It just kind of sucks, to be honest. So yeah, that's the end of the Roger Moore era. And that's the end of the Connery era. And that's the end of the George Lazenby era. Because I feel like that was all one canon, more or less. A little bit loose, but all one canon. This is when the timeline slides completely in a different direction. Because all those things that happened in the Connery and Roger era, those all happened with Timothy Dalton and Pierce Brosnan's respective eras, which are also connected, by the way. And certainly Roger Moore and certainly Timothy Dalton and Pierce, certainly that's the same Bond. Starting with GoldenEye's pre-title sequence, which was set in 1986, 1 year before Living Daylights. It all links up, But when we get to the Timothy Dalton era, it just begins to... That's when the timeline really begins to slide. Because then we had to age Bond down to reboot, sort of. This was like a soft reboot. This was sort of the Daniel Craig of its time. But we still acknowledge those older things happened. Those things from those movies. So, with that, we just kind of have to assume that all those things from the Connery and the Roger era, that those things would have happened in the 70s or at some other time. It wouldn't have happened in their respective times of film release for this Bond. So it's the same Bond, but it's a new Bond. That's pretty much what we get with Timothy Dalton and Pierce Brosnan. And The Living Daylights, I have to say, it's my second favorite Bond movie. I really love The Living Daylights. It's got some problems. Some really obvious problems at times. The way the Mujahideen are represented in it is a little bit weird and dated. Especially at the ending of the film when they show up at the Opera House. Very cartoony and stupid. But this was the first Bond movie that really, really tried to sound, or really, really tried to look modern. And really tried to be high stakes. And you see little bits of that in For Your Eyes Only, being a little bit more serious, being a more mature Bond that even turns down sex at one point. But, and even in Octopussy, the stakes were kind of higher. Like, it's very over the top, but the ending where they're on the plane, where Bond's holding on, and the stuff on the train, where Bond's running on the train, holding on the edge, it's very Uncharted, and it's very, like, it's weird that is probably the most action-based Bond movie, and it's Roger Moore at his pretty much his oldest. He was like 55 years old. He was like just hanging on at that point. And with Timothy Dalton, they rose those stakes, and it felt like it mattered a lot more. And for that, I really love The Living Daylights. And License to Kill I don't like as much. I feel like the ending of it, or the last act with the truck chase and all that, I feel like that was all very un-Bond, very kind of not Bond. But the stakes really were risen a lot. I mean, License to Kill, the stuff that happens to Felix, that was all taken from Live and Let Die, the book. So License to Kill was interesting because it used a lot of Ian Fleming directly, but it was also an original story. So it was almost like the perfect blend, the way License to Kill did it. And like the composer for it was the guy who composed the music for Die Hard, and it felt very Die Hard. It felt, I mean, I say that, but I'm talking out of my ass because I haven't seen Die Hard, but I've heard other people say that it feels like Die Hard. And if it doesn't feel like Die Hard, it certainly feels like 80s violence. And that's something that is really unique about License to Kill. And License to Kill's themes really come into play when we reach GoldenEye, because it all sort of comes to fruition. The way that these three films connect, GoldenEye was originally going to be Timothy Dalton's movie. It was going to be his third one, but then there were a bunch of problems and it didn't happen. So they brought in Pierce, who was a worthy successor. I would say my favorite Bonds are Timothy and Pierce. They're probably both tied. I might like Pierce a little more just because I love GoldenEye so much, but they're both really good. But when you reach GoldenEye, it all sort of comes full circle because there are little references to GoldenEye, coincidentally, because it's all coincidence. But there are little references to GoldenEye in the Living Daylights. When they're going through the list of like Soviet spies that are deadly in Living Daylights, like, oh, this spy is this and this spy is that. One of the spies that they talk about at MI6 headquarters is a woman that kills people with her thighs. And it's shown on the screen as like an overweight woman that kills people with her thighs, a little bit of humor thrown in. But the concept of the character that does that, literally foreshadowing for the woman in this film, played by Famke Janssen? I forget her name. What's her name? Onatop. How could I forget that? Yeah, Onatop. Who has the best death, by the way. I love her death. Maybe my favorite moment in Bond history, just when she's on top of him and then he takes the AK and shoots it with one hand and shoots the guy in the head. It almost reminds me of Metal Gear Solid 5, like when you get spotted and it goes to bullet time and you shoot a guy in the head, like, and you make an impossible shot that should be literally impossible. That's basically what happens there, and then she dies, and it's great. And then the other thing is that GoldenEye has the theme of loyalty and the theme of, your demons of the past coming back to haunt you and stuff, and all this stuff with Alec Trevelyan, which, ties right into License to Kill, because that's what License to Kill is literally about. It's about loyalty. Everything with Felix Leiter and all this stuff, and I believe Pam has a quote in that this isn't all about you. You make everything about you. I'm paraphrasing that, but she says that, and that's the thing that really gets called into question and self-awareness at this point, because Bond in the Timothy Dalton era, he's tired of this shit. He's done. Like, there's one part where he says, "Stuff my orders," and I wish it was R or PG-13 where he could say "fuck my orders," because it just felt so natural that he would say that in that moment. It's so, like, Bond is tired of this shit by the time he reaches Living Daylights. We went from Bond in the Connery era being, as Ian Fleming would put, who he was directing his books towards, red-blooded heterosexual males. He was like the most red-blooded heterosexual male ever in the Connery era. And then Roger chills things out a little bit. And then you get to Timothy, and he's just tired of it. He's tired of it. He's done. He doesn't want to do this anymore. And then Pierce kind of settles in a way, and he sort of accepts it. And that's almost like the arc of this character, because Pierce is the very neutral Bond. He's got a little bit of Connery. He's got a little bit of Roger. He's got a little bit of Timothy for sure. Even in how he looks, like the way his hair looks. It's very... I feel like the way Pierce looks is pretty much the perfect way Bond is supposed to look, I think. And he looks very close to Timothy. I feel like Timothy and Pierce both look how I imagine Bond to look. And... man, it's like, I could go on and on. I could make a video on its own about GoldenEye. One of the things that I love in GoldenEye is when he's on the ship and he's like stealthing through the ship, and a guy comes in, like a guard comes in, and Bond just so casually just kicks his ass and flips him with a towel. He uses a towel, he like wraps it around his gun, and then he flips him down the stairs, and then he takes the towel that he flipped him with, and he dabs his head. A little bit of sweat on his head, he dabs his head. And it's like, it's perfect. It's so perfect. I love the way that he's being evaluated in the beginning by the girl. when he's driving through the place. I know people don't like the music that plays in that area, but I don't care. I love it. It kind of reminds me of X-Men the animated series. Like it's very weird synthesizers, but it's like 90s and 80s. It's all over the place. Guilty pleasure on that one. And I love the soundtrack on GoldenEye. But I love that Bond is getting evaluated in the beginning, because remember at the end of License to Kill, he lost his job. He left for loyalty to Felix and on his personal vendetta. There's more to this than your personal vendetta. That's what Pam said. I just remembered. And he went on this vendetta, and he lost his job, and he gets his job back at the very end of the movie. There's a little reference from Felix that like, hey, M called. He's got another assignment for you. Whatever. It's a throwaway thing. But I love the concept that the reason why the wait was so long between 1989 to 1995, from Timothy Dalton to Pierce Brosnan, within the continuity of Bond, and within the loose continuum, that Bond was put on a sort of psych evaluation after that. That Bond was kind of left sitting for a while. And it gave him a bit of a rest that he needed, because he was tired of it. And I really just appreciate all of that in GoldenEye, and the way the girl talks to him, Natalia, like, why are you doing this? Why are you so cold? Why do you keep doing this? And Bond says, it's what keeps me alive. And she says, no, it's what keeps you alone. And then he grabs her and forcefully kisses her like Sean Connery would. You know, the old Cold War warrior comes out of him there, that M scolds him about. And people have made fun of GoldenEye, saying it's, you know, those movies were politically correct. You know, people talk about the Daniel Craig movies, like, oh, what's woke, what's not woke. And then people will bring up, like, the Pierce Brosnan era. Well, that was politically correct. You know, 90s political correctness was a thing. But I think what people are missing is that M underestimates Bond, and oftentimes Bond is correct. She might call him a sexist, misogynist dinosaur and dismiss him, but he was correct about so much of what he said. And she always underestimates him. And, you know, it's easy to dismiss people, but you don't know what's going on in their head. And Bond is such an easy character to dismiss as a monster. But he's doing all this to cope with something. There are people that do awful things in the world to cope with their situation. You know, all the vices that people do. And that's what I love about Bond, is that he's so human. Because he pursues these vices, and it's all to cope with him being a hitman. Like, he's literally a hitman. There's a great scene in Thunderball, the book, that was cut from the movie, where Bond goes to M, and M basically scolds Bond and says, 007, you are not fit to serve. You're addicted to drugs. You're addicted to alcohol. You're getting fatter. You need to go to rehab. And Bond is like, what the fuck? Like, he's so pissed off about it. He's so pissed off. And in Thunderball, people forget about this, but that book, or a lot of people don't know about this, but that book literally begins with Bond going to rehab. Because he's fucked his body up so bad. It's one of the great things about Ian Fleming's writing, is that he just goes into every little detail. He's such a meticulous, I don't know if I'm saying that word right, but a slow writer in the way that he goes into every little detail in a way that, like, almost Tolkien-esque, where Tolkien would just describe every little detail of, like, every hobbit hole, every wheel that, you know, or like wheelbarrow that is being pushed for wheat or whatever. But I'm sorry, John Tolkien, but Ian Fleming, I think, is a better writer. I think he's more skilled at doing that. Because the way Ian Fleming describes Bond taking cold showers, the way he describes Bond, the way he looks at himself in the mirror, and the sort of ego trip that he feels just looking at himself in the mirror. The way he describes Bond with his breakfast meals that he would eat. Like, people joke, I've heard the joke that, like, you know, there's the cartoons in the morning that you'd watch or whatever, like Saturday morning cartoons, and then they would give you commercials for cereal, like Tricks Are for Kids or whatever, and then it would say, part of a perfect balanced breakfast, and it would show, like, a waffle, and a piece of toast, and eggs, and a tall glass of orange juice, and cereal, a bowl of cereal. It's like, no one eats a breakfast like that. Well, I'll tell you, Bond did. Bond ate breakfast like that, because he was so indulgent, and it was just like, that's what he does to cope. And that leads perfectly into Casino Royale. But before I get to that, I got to talk about the next two Bond movies, the next two Pierce Brosnans. I don't have too much to say about them. I think, and I have nothing to say about Die Another Day. It's trash. Sorry. Sorry, but not sorry. It belongs in the pile next to Moonraker, which I didn't even mention, by the way, during the Roger Moore era. It's basically with Moonraker. It's basically with Diamonds Are Forever. It's whatever. If people like them, I understand why you like them, because they're campy. I'll admit, Diamonds Are Forever, or not Diamonds Are, Die Another Day. That movie made me laugh a good amount. Certain parts of it are so over the top. Even some of the film editing is just over the top. It feels like Robert Rodriguez made it. It felt like a Spy Kids movie or something. But in the pre-title sequence in Korea, like the first half of Die Another Day is actually okay. The fencing scene is okay. I like some parts of Die Another Day, but it just goes so off the rails. I mean, you literally have stealth camouflage from Metal Gear Solid because you have an invisible car, and it's like, that stuff belongs in a different spy genre. It's not James Bond. Sorry. Everyone has their limits on, like, when you jump the shark, when you go off the rails. That's the moment for Bond, I think, when you get to that. When you get to, like, when you go a little too Metal Gear Solid is basically the limit. Which, by the way, No Time to Die does cross that limit, because Fox dies literally in the film, to some extent. I'm sorry, that is a spoiler. Yeah, I said I'd warn, but sorry. It's not really Fox, whatever. I won't really talk about it much, but anyways, and if you don't know what Fox Die is, then it's unspoiled, but when you get to the next movie, what's the next movie? Tomorrow Never Dies I just talked about Tomorrow Never Dies, which is just kind of a pure action movie. I don't know. I like Tomorrow Never Dies. It's a guilty pleasure movie for me, though I'm not too guilty about it. I don't know. It felt very Mission Impossible. You know, every Bond movie is reacting to the time that it's set in. You have a blaxploitation movie in the 70s. You have campy stuff in the 80s and the early 80s. Then it gets serious, and then it's like Die Hard. And then in the 90s, we're back, and it's more kind of balanced in a way. When you get to this movie, Tomorrow Never Dies, it's straight up Mission Impossible. It's very Mission Impossible. And for better or for worse, I mean, I like parts of that movie. If I want just a pure action Bond movie, it's one of the good ones. Tomorrow Never Dies is one of the best ones. But it's all if you want that, you know? So, you know, some people want it, some people don't. That's fine. The plot of it is interesting. You know, the media trying to start wars for ratings, basically, or to secure rights to reporting. That sounds like real life, basically, at this point. Yeah, and we all knew that was kind of happening. I don't know if you guys know this, but before the Iraq War, and before 9/11, the media was already talking about the Iraq War. People sometimes talk about, like, oh, 9/11 happened, and then we suddenly did the Iraq thing. I mean, that is kind of true, and that helped with bringing people in, you know, rising and people volunteering for the military, joining the military. But the media was talking about the Iraq War before that, and like, invading Iraq and dealing with Saddam Hussein. That was already being talked about before 9/11 even happened by the media. So I just thought I'd mention that. I don't know. Yeah. The next movie, The World Is Not Enough. I'm getting a little bit burnt out, sorry. But, because this has all been one take, but The World Is Not Enough, that movie is, it's got some good things about it. The villain is evil. Really evil. I think she's the most evil Bond character ever. Like, she's just insanely, insanely evil. And I know that she has PTSD. She's got an anxiety attack in the film. And that's all relatable for me. But, like, she's so evil that, like, none of that really matters. Like, they play that up for sympathy a little bit. But I can tell you right now, I don't care. I don't really give a shit. She's so evil that, like, you can't really squeeze sympathy out of me for her, no matter what she's been through, because of the stuff that she does in the film. Man, the pre-title sequence of that movie is so far-fetched with the fertilizer on the money and, like, the way it blows up, and that was insane. Or not even fertilizer, I don't know what it was. That magnesium touches Bond's hand, and then I guess Bond has, like, a 200-something IQ, because then he's like, the money, and then he runs, and he connects it immediately when he sees his hand fizzing. Like, I don't know how the writers wrote that, how they came up with that. But, yeah, I don't know. There's some good things about that movie. There's some stuff with M that's cool. But the problem is that it just goes too far. It goes to, I don't know, there's certain scenes, like when they're in the oil pipeline and it's going super fast. Again, it's like, I feel like I'm in a Robert Rodriguez thing. Like I'm watching Spy Kids, or I'm watching, like a kids thing, or, I don't know. Like I'm watching a spy spoof or something. Like, because when they're going through that pipe, it's like in the CGI and they're moving super fast. I'm just like, just give me a fucking break. Like, why do that? Whatever, I don't know. Tomorrow Never Dies has good things about it. Or, sorry, I get it mixed up. World Is Not Enough. Everyone gets those two mixed up. But yeah, that's all. I think that's all I have to say about the Pierce Brosnan era. I like Q's exit, for sure. Yeah. And then we get to Daniel Craig. So, here's the thing with Daniel Craig. We got to talk about this. So, I'm going to talk about No Time to Die spoilers now. I'm sorry to segue that into the Daniel Craig era, because I know, I know people probably want to hear me talk about Casino Royale without talking about spoilers for No Time to Die, but I feel like this is all relevant. So, I watched No Time to Die. And I will drop the spoiler right now. So, countdown. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Bond dies in the film. And to me, I go back to comic books here when I think about this. There's a comic book story, a Superman comic book story, called Superman Red Sun. And it's a Superman story where Superman, his ship as a baby, crash lands in Soviet Russia. And Superman is basically raised as a communist within communist Soviet Russia. It's a concept that is original. It's different. Lex Luthor is like an American superhero. He's super pro-capitalist, and it's like the super pro-capitalist versus the communist Superman, and Superman kills Stalin in it, and it's like really interesting. I don't know, it's different, it's interesting, quote unquote. See, that's all interesting. It's an Elseworlds, right? They call it that in DC, an Elseworlds story, where it's not canon. It's a sort of like side story. It's a what if story. To me, No Time to Die it's a what if story. It's an Elseworlds. But it's weird. It's really, really weird. And it's more complicated than that. but I compare it to an Elseworld story because for some people, the concept of Superman Red Sun, the concept of a communist Superman, for some people, whether you're, political leanings of like Soviet, like if you're a socialist in real life or if you're a capitalist, whatever, just some people might like the concept of like, what if Superman was this? It's like the concept of what if the Nazis won World War II and like Wolfenstein, or the Man in High Castle or whatever. Like it's just like a what if story. Some people are really into those what if stories and they really want to see that. Some people want to see communist Superman because it's like, well, that's cool and interesting and that's unique and let's try something new. Let's kill Bond. Let's see a Bond story where Bond dies, For me, I'm not into that. I'm not into the communist Superman story. I'm not into the Bond dies story. I just don't want it. Like, I'm not into that concept. So No Time to Die, for me, I think is a 6 or a 7 out of 10 movie. I think it's okay. I think it's fine. It's messy. It was made by 2 directors. There was all kinds of development hell over it. I think it shows. I think it's kind of a weird film. It's too long. Yet somehow it feels too short at the same time because it's not getting enough stuff in. But it's a movie that feels like it shouldn't exist, basically. Like, I don't know. Like, I just feel like it doesn't need to exist because of the way Spectre ended. Spectre ended in a way that kind of ended the Daniel Craig movies, And Daniel Craig, I'll link a video in the description to this great documentary about Daniel Craig, but when Daniel Craig was making Spectre, his leg was broken through like half of the filming. So in the action scenes where he's like fighting guys on a train, like he's trying his hardest to not give weight to his leg. So he was asked after filming the movie, or after the movie was complete, would you make another Bond movie? And he said, during the press tour, he said, I'd rather slash my wrists than play Bond again. Which the media was like, whoa, that's a big deal. So, which I, as a fan, will admit, whoa, that's a big deal. And it made my feelings on Daniel Craig even more mixed, because it's like, it feels like he doesn't like the role. And it feels like this Bond is so different from the other Bonds, because he's so Jason Bourne, that it feels out of character. It feels like the character is not the same, except in Skyfall, because Skyfall felt like an homage to the whole series. And I'll talk about Skyfall in depth, for sure, in a bit. But it was such a shock to hear that, and it was such a sad moment, because it made me look down on the Daniel Craig era. Because there were times where I was high on it, and then there were times where I was low on it. Casino Royale is a book that I felt, or Casino Royale was a movie. It was a movie that I felt high on, and then I read the book, and then I felt low on the movie again, because the book was such a great Cold War story. And the movie had to change it and make it not Cold War anymore. And I felt like it kind of ruined it. In the first half of the Casino Royale, you could cut the first half of that movie out, and it's fine. It doesn't change anything. Because the book of Casino Royale doesn't start until halfway through the film. So you could literally just cut out the first half of the film, and it basically doesn't matter. So I was pretty critical of Casino Royale, weirdly enough, because it's one of the most critically acclaimed ones. But when I got to No Time to Die and I finished it, I felt like when I first watched it, my hot take was that this is the worst Bond movie, and this shouldn't exist. But then I thought about it more, and I watched some videos on it, and people talk about it. And I feel like it's not the worst Bond movie at all, really. It's kind of in the middle of the road somewhere. But it just comes down to that concept. Do you want Bond to die? If you're fine with that concept, then it's a great movie, or it's a good movie for you. Good to great, maybe, depending on how you feel. If you're not into that concept, then it's kind of a deal breaker. And I wonder how British people feel, because I brought up British people earlier about how Bond is such an icon to Britishness. Like, how do British people feel about killing off such a national icon? So that's when, after finishing the film, I went to one place first. I'll give you guys a second to guess. I did research. So, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I went to the wiki. I went to the James Bond wiki for Daniel Craig. And I read his backstory. The backstory for this Bond, this rebooted Bond. And I will tell you, it is completely different. And I was shocked to read it. He is a different character. I knew Daniel Craig's Bond was a reboot, but I did not know he was such a reboot. The original Bond served in the Navy and was the youngest 00 to ever exist. The youngest person to reach 00 status. So he would have reached it in his late 20s or early 30s. He was a very young agent because 00s aren't expected to live very long. They're usually very, very skilled, and then they die quick. Bond keeps living forever. Usually the 00 program is terminated when they're about 42 to 44 years old. And Bond keeps going. Like, by the end of Roger Moore's career, he was 57 years old in A View to a Kill. So Bond just keeps going. And that's, in Skyfall, he's a lot older. So Bond just, you can't stop this guy. They keep needing him. That's how good he is. He keeps coming back. But here's the key. That's the previous Bond continuity. With Daniel Craig's Bond, he got his 00 status when he was 38 years old. That changes everything. So in Casino Royale, Daniel Craig's 38 years old in real life. And according to the continuity, he's 38 years old. So Daniel Craig's Bond has, if you go to the Wikipedia and you read it, which I'll link in the description, because why the hell not? His history is that he served in Iraq and Afghanistan previous to, and throughout the Middle East, previous to even the Iraq War and the Afghanistan War in the 90s. He was doing special ops in the Middle East and in Bosnia and all over the world. He was doing special ops with British SAS 15 years before he was ever a 00. So it's a really cool concept to think about that, and I don't believe in the code name theory or anything like that, but it's a cool concept that, hey, when Pierce Brosnan was doing GoldenEye, Daniel Craig's Bond was young in another timeline, basically, fighting or doing special ops in the Middle East, basically, and becoming a hardened badass. So that's why in Casino Royale, and this explains everything to me, when you get to Casino Royale and Bond is a badass already, it's his first mission, right? It's his first mission. Casino Royale is the beginning, as it was portrayed in Ian Fleming's original work. And yet, he is such a badass in that movie. Like when he's chasing that one guy in Africa or wherever, or in South America, and he's climbing up the cranes like a monkey, and he's jumping over shit like he's Spider-Man. All that stuff, Bond had years of training before that. So this is a 00, this is a Bond that just reaches 00 status, but he is at the appropriate age of 00s when they typically would die. He's in his late 30s. He's basically a fucking badass that has done a fuck ton of tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. And even those wars. So, now the war in Afghanistan happened in 2001. The war in Iraq happened in 2003. That's when it started. In the film starts in 2006. So, to be fair, it wasn't all just like Iraq or whatever. It was a lot of it was just throughout the Middle East, throughout different locations around the world. He was already a hardened badass doing special ops, killing probably drug dealers and terrorists and all kinds of stuff. Drug trafficking, human trafficking. This guy was already a hard ass before he even was a 00. And that's what makes Daniel Craig different. Because the previous Bond was a Navy guy and a Cold War warrior, a Cold War soldier, a relic. This guy is not that. He is different. And that makes Daniel Craig a different Bond. He's more military. He's a military Bond. And it's awesome. He's awesome. And I came to terms with it. I've accepted this Bond. Daniel Craig is a great 007. He's just a different 007. And people made a big deal about him being blonde and stuff at the time, and, blonde Bond, whatever. I understand why people would be a little bit weirded out by that, considering Red Grant and From Russia with Love was blonde, and Red Grant kind of looks like Daniel Craig a little bit. So Daniel Craig looks more like a Bond henchman than James Bond himself. But it all worked out in the end because he was just a different 007. And it all comes full circle when we reach Skyfall. Because when we reached Skyfall, it broke the fourth wall a little bit and started entering back into that old timeline of Bond, where there were references to the exploding pen and references to the ejector seat in the Aston Martin and stuff like that. And there were all these things about him being super old because of how they time jumped. And it worked within the Casino Royale timeline because he was already old when he reached Casino Royale. And we can assume a bunch of adventures or missions or whatever had happened between Casino Royale and Skyfall. And Quantum of Solace obviously happens right after. Quantum of Solace, by the way, a lot of people don't like that movie. I actually like that movie. I think it's pretty entertaining. It is laughably ridiculous at times, like when they jump out of the plane and they survive. I laugh my ass off every time. There are parts of that movie that are so over the top, I laugh pretty hard. And the editing is so bad, I kind of find it funny too. It's trying so hard to be Jason Bourne, and it's not, and it's funny to me. I know that's weird to say, saying bad filmmaking is funny. Like bad film editing is funny, but it kind of just tickles me in a funny way. And I'm not like a film guy. I'm not a film buff. I've never gone to film school. I'm just a guy that's a fan. And that's important to know, by the way. If anyone's watched my other videos, know that I'm not an expert in anything. I'm just a guy. I'm not a writer. I know nothing. Yeah, so to get back on track with that, his Bond was already a badass, and he was already older. So when you reach Skyfall, it's this perfect merging of the timelines in spirit. It may not technically take place in the Pierce Brosnan to Sean Connery timeline, but it feels like in spirit it is. And that's what makes Skyfall so great. This is the end. Hold your breath and count to 10. It tells you right in the beginning. It feels like it's written as the last Bond film. It is the end. And for such a storied franchise, with such a long legacy of 25 films, right? Like I said, compare that to Star Wars. 6 films, like the Star Wars saga of 6. The Indiana Jones movies, there's 4. Lord of the Rings, they tried to milk that, but, whatever. Still, only 6 films. How many other franchises? I mean, Jason Bourne, again, only a few films. You could compare it to video games. Usually video games don't go on for 25 entries unless you're Mario or Zelda. So it's such a deep, long franchise, So how do you end that? How do you end Bond? One thing I thought of relating to No Time to Die is I think different Bond fans might have their own personal way that they imagine Bond dying. To me, I always imagine Bond going out, and maybe this is insensitive, but like Ian Fleming. Because Ian Fleming based Bond to some extent off of himself, off of his own personal experiences when he was in World War II in special intelligence or intelligence, that he actually played a game of poker against Nazis, Germans in France, I believe, for an espionage mission of some kind, because he had served in the military. And that's what he based Casino Royale off of, was his own personal experiences that he fictionalized and made different. Ian Fleming died because of health problems. from drinking, and his liver was shot, and he just got kind of old. He was retired in the Caribbean, in Jamaica, at his house, which he called Goldeneye, and he just went out. I want to say peacefully, but I actually don't know. But that's how I imagine Bond going. I imagine Bond going out peacefully. On the beach, or in the Caribbean, in the Bahamas, Jamaica, someplace like that. And maybe the song Underneath the Mango Tree playing from Dr. No. Something like that. That's what I imagine Bond, his last moment. That's what I imagine. Not what happened in No Time to Die. So, again, I don't want that kind of story. I don't want it told. I don't need it. But how does Bond end in Skyfall? If we're going to end the character here, if we're going to end the timeline here, if we imagine it as if it's the end of a timeline, this is the end. If those words are true, if we imagine Skyfall as the last Bond film, is it not a perfect way to end it? Now, people might say, well, Bond didn't retire at the end of the film, though. And that's how I felt, too. I felt like that was the only missing piece. Like, that was the only flaw in Skyfall, is that Bond didn't retire at the end. Then it would have been a perfect ending. But you know what? Did Q retire? Did M retire? Well, M retired. Sorry. M did retire. Did Q ever retire? That's more important. Did Q retire? No. No. Q went to the grave serving his country. And I don't think Bond goes out any other way than that. I think he stays with MI6, whether it's a field job or a desk job. I think he'd be doing the field job no matter what. I think he would do that shit till he dies. Until he peacefully went in the Caribbean on some mission or something. That's how I imagine. Or maybe he wasn't on a mission. Maybe he was taking a day off. But he never stopped. He never stopped serving. And that's how I imagine Bond. Because that's his family. That's what he has. For a man that had such horrible family issues that we see referenced in Skyfall, and we know existed. He went into that hole and he came out changed man, as it said in Skyfall. He hid in the basement after his parents died. After he found out that his parents died in the climbing accident. He came out a changed man. I don't want to evangelize you guys too much or anything, but I'm going to link another video in the description to a Catholic bishop named Bishop Robert Barron, who talked about Skyfall. And it's another important piece of information, because Bond also was raised very Catholic, and it's part of why he was sexist as well. He had bad experiences with nuns and stuff like that. I believe. I could be wrong. Or it was a maid or something. There was some woman that he had to deal with in Catholic school that always upset him. And it's all these painful moments. It's all this trauma that this character has to live with. Again and again. From Vesper to his wife, to every Bond girl that maybe he failed to protect, to everyone that he broke their heart. He maybe loved them genuinely for a moment, and then it was fleeting. That's this man's life. And I don't see him ever retiring. I don't see him marrying, even, and settling down officially. Or having a child. This character is immortalized, but he's also tortured. He's like immortally... He's tormented forever. But he also loves it, though. He also loves what he does. It's how he finds meaning. It's his meaning. His job is his meaning. That's his identity. And that's the only way Bond goes out, to me. That's it. So with that, I don't think I have much to say about Spectre. Again, like I said, I could make a full video about Skyfall alone, just like I said I could for GoldenEye. And with that, I think that ends this video. I think I'm done. Trying to think of anything else that I missed. I think Spectre is a good movie. Again, rewatching it, I think it ends the Daniel Craig era pretty well. And I prefer that ending to the ending where he dies. I like him throwing away the Walther PPK there. That's a good ending for Daniel Craig's Bond. For the new Bond, you know, the military SAS, Special Forces, Navy SEAL type Bond. That's a good ending for him. I like Spectre as an ending for him. And maybe No Time to Die, hey, what the hell, maybe that's a good ending for you, for that character, for that version. But it is time to move on. It's time to move on. So, that's the question from here, you know. Who's going to be the next Bond? Who are we hiring next? Who's the Broccoli family going to look to? Well, I don't know. I don't know if we go back in time to the 60s, to the 70s, if we go back to the Cold War, or if we keep going in modern day, if we keep moving forward. A period piece Bond film would be interesting. I think the actor that you have to go with is Henry Cavill. I don't really see it any other way. He's 38 years old right now, which is the exact age that Daniel Craig was when he took the job. So I see really only Henry Cavill doing this. He's actually been deep-faked onto pictures of Timothy Dalton, and it's kind of uncanny, but it's also kind of cool, because he does look... I think they did it with Pierce as well. He looks like Bond. You can do this. Right sort of eye color, right sort of hair. Dark hair, they describe him. Parted to the side. How Fleming describes him. Yeah, so... As a Superman fan, it's heartbreaking because DC has really fucked things up. But as a Bond fan, that gives me hope a little bit. So, yeah, that's how we end this video, I think. That's how I end this video. Is, No Time to Die? Well, that's the great thing about this character. He never dies. He keeps going. And James Bond will return, as it always says at the end of every movie. So, yeah, James Bond will return. James Bond never dies.